I was watching a period drama the other day with a friend who's, a casual history fan. And in the middle of this tense palace scene, a character walks in, and the subtitle just labels him a prince.
Right.
My friend, he just shrugs and says, oh, so he's the emperor's son. He's set for life. But then the scene shifted. This prince had to kowtow not to the emperor, but to another man who looked younger than him.
And that throws people off completely.
It did. My friend was just baffled. He's like, wait, I thought they were both princes. Why is the older one acting like a servant?
And that confusion is exactly what the Qing dynasty intended.
To the outside world, these men were all royalty. But inside the Forbidden City, the difference between a Qinhuang and a Beizi was, it was the difference between holding the keys to the empire and being a glorified, well-paid prisoner.
Absolutely. A huge gulf.
We tend to think of prince as this singular golden ticket to power. But in the Qing court, it was a ruthless, shifting ladder. One man might inherit a title that stays ironclad for centuries, while his cousin born to the same father watches his own status diminish with every passing year until his grandsons are essentially commoners.
It's a system of designed obsolescence, really.
It was a world where your title determined the exact number of buttons on your robe, the amount of silver in your pocket, and whether or not you were even allowed to leave the capital without permission.
Without control.
Most people see the glittering robes and the palace walls and just think of privilege. But when you look closer at how these titles were actually handed out, taken away, and downgraded, you realize it wasn't just about honor.
No, it was a masterclass in political survival.
It was a system designed to ensure that no matter how many sons an emperor had, only one person ever truly held the power. If you've ever wondered why some princes in history books seem to lead armies, while others just seem to disappear into the background, the answer isn't in their bloodline. It's in the hidden hierarchy of the titles they carried.
That hierarchy is absolutely central to how the Qing sustained itself for, 268 years? The thing is, the institutional design of this diminishing inheritance system, it was just an incredibly sophisticated mechanism.
A mechanism for what, exactly?
To prevent the fragmentation of central authority. You do that by systematically, generation by generation, reducing the political and economic power of the emperor's descendants.
So, okay, if the emperor created a new prince, say a son or a nephew, what happened to that title when the prince died? Did his eldest son just inherit the full power?
Well, that depends entirely on the type of title, and that's the source of all the confusion you described. The standard rule for most of them, anything below the absolute top tier, was called feng on descent.
And that's the diminishing ladder.
That's the ladder. With each generation, the title dropped one rank.
So if you were created a prince of the second rank, a Junwang, your son automatically drops to Bali, your grandson drops to Bedzi, and so on.
Exactly. And the descent continues until it hits the lowest hereditary rank, which was the Fengen's Gongo Gong, a kind of duke.
And after that?
After that, the title became purely titular. The descendants were essentially commoners, albeit with some minor inherited privileges.
That system must have transformed what could have been hundreds of politically ambitious cousins
into a vast pool of loyal, status-conscious, but ultimately powerless bureaucrats. And the key is, they were all economically dependent on the imperial stipend.
That economic dependency seems crucial. So the only way to keep a high status was either to be recreated as a prince by the current emperor for some new service.
That, or you had to belong to the tiny elite group that had permanent status.
And that's where the iron-capped princes come in.
That's where they come in. When you analyze their strategic role, especially in the early Qing, you see how granting this permanent hereditary status was a crucial incentive.
An incentive for military loyalty.
Military loyalty and, the successful consolidation of Manchu rule across all these diverse territories. This was the exception to the rule.
So they were the ones whose titles, no matter how many generations passed, they never diminished.
Precisely. They were usually created during that early foundational period of the dynasty. They were rewarded for extraordinary military service during the conquest.
So they weren't just the emperor's kin.
No, in a way, they were the co-founders of the state. By making their titles perpetually inheritable at the highest rank, the Qing ensured the enduring loyalty of the most powerful Manchu aristocratic houses.
And there weren't many of them, right?
Only 12 original iron-capped prince houses. They served as this stabilized military and political elite who could, in theory, check the emperor's power, but were, more practically, absolutely integral to the state's early survival.
It sounds like a perfect political calculation. You keep the core founders powerful to stabilize the regime.
But you ruthlessly dismantle the power of everyone else, including the emperor's own non-inheriting sons and grandsons.
In this dismantling, it wasn't just left to chance, it was actively managed through these powerful institutions.
Oh, absolutely. The integration of the Imperial Clan Court, the Zongrenfu, with the whole princely stipend system shows you just how the emperors used economic dependency and strict behavioral surveillance
To do what?
to transform potential royal rivals into a stabilized, loyal, and essentially bureaucratic elite.
What exactly was the Imperial Clan Court's role? It sounds like it was more than just a registry office for titles.
Oh, it was the ultimate mechanism of control. The Zongrenfu wasn't just for maintaining the imperial family tree. It was the entire system of social and judicial oversight for every single person belonging to the Zongrenfu clan.
The imperial surname.
The imperial surname. It managed their stipends, it enforced Manchu moral codes, it handled all legal disputes involving clan members, and it kept them under incredibly strict surveillance.
So if you were a prince, even a high-ranking one,
You couldn't leave the capital, you couldn't travel, you couldn't engage in any significant financial activities without the Zongrenfu's approval. It turned the very concept of a royal cousin from a political threat into an official, closely managed bureaucratic post.
So that confusion my friend had, seeing a prince kowtow to a younger prince, was the visible result of this systemic, legal, and economic control, all designed to just eliminate any political leverage.
Exactly. The title dictates your silver, your movement, and your ritual obligations.
That's the core institutional lesson.
It is, and that kind of systematic control didn't just apply to the imperial clan and its diminishing titles. It was applied across the entire conquering elite. The foundation of Qing power, the very mechanism they used to administer their vast empire and enforce their own Manchu identity, was the 8-banner system.
We've established that the Qing system was built for political survival, using these ruthless legal structures to consolidate power. Let's look beyond the princes now, to the institutions that define the entire conquering aristocracy. The banners were clearly massive, but let's summarize their scope. What were the, say, 3 main functions of the banners?
Well, they weren't just an army, they were a kind of parallel state structure that the king was built on. We can define their role with 3 main pillars.
Okay.
First, they were the instrument and the symbol of the Zongrenfu clan's dynastic power, the legal and military representation of Qing legitimacy.
So essentially, they were the dynasty militarily and politically.
In a very real sense, yes. Second, they provided the critical source of social and institutional cohesion. This was the mechanism for forging all these disparate, often newly conquered tribes into a unified, shared Manchu identity, or what scholars call Mancuness.
The cultural melting pot, but enforced by decree.
Exactly. And third, they created and sustained a standing military elite that was economically and politically dependent on the Khan emperor, which guaranteed their unwavering loyalty above all else.
Let's trace their origins, because that shows how this military expediency morphed into social control. It started under Nurhaci as 4, not 8, banners in the early 17th century.
That's right. Around 1601, Nurhaci initially organized his existing tribal units, which were called Nuru, into these proto-banners.
And Nuru literally means arrows.
It does, yeah. It represents the basic fighting unit. These units were then grouped into permanent military superunits, the Gusa, or banners. The immediate purpose was purely military, to regularize the army, establish a clear chain of command, and set clear quotas for providing armored troops.
So it was initially a simple way to organize manpower for battle, but the shift in administrative focus is what made it a true mechanism of control, wasn't it?
Absolutely. From the very beginning, the banners were designed to manage entire households, not just the individual soldier. This meant that the banner company was, structurally intended to be a self-sufficient entity. They had to sustain the heavy troops they supplied, handle administration like population registration, taxation, even provide civil services for their members.
And crucially, this system of administration was totally separate from the regular civil service for the Han population.
Completely separate. And the bannermen were always privileged within this parallel system.
It sounds like if you were a bannerman, you lived under a separate military-style government, even when you were at home.
You did. And this is where the forging of that Manchu identity, or Manchuness, required systematically dismantling old loyalties. The critical reorganization happened in 1615 when the system expanded to 8 banners. But the key element was standardization.
What do you mean?
Company sizes were fixed at 300, which required massive reshuffling and population transfers across all the banners.
Wait, why was that shuffling so important?
It was an intentional act of social engineering. By mixing up subjugated tribes and separating clans into different banner units, they deliberately broke down the integrity of the original tribal structures.
Well, that's a strategy we've seen before, isn't it?
Very similar to how Genghis Khan organized the Mongol Tumans centuries earlier. You destroy the old basis of loyalty to your clan leader or your local tribe, and you force that loyalty to center on the Khan emperor first and foremost.
So the system itself was designed to prevent any single tribe from gaining enough cohesion or independence to challenge the center.
Precisely. And then in 1635, Hong Taiji cemented this new composite identity by officially renaming the core people from Jurchen to Manchu.
Which was a political
A
statement.
huge one. It privileged the Jiangsu Jurchens, Hong Taiji's own group, over others. The creation of the Manchu identity was necessary for conquest and consolidation. It was an artificial yet incredibly powerful political construct that masked internal diversity but centralized authority.
And the banners quickly grew beyond just the core Manchu population. How did the hierarchy expand ethnically? What does that reveal about Qing pragmatism?
Well, the expansion just reflected their shifting military needs. After Ije Khan's surrender in 1635, the Mongols were incorporated, which led to the formation of 8 Mongol banners.
And that wasn't just a military move.
Not at all. It was a major political statement. It positioned the new Qing state as an inheritor of the Yuan and a major power on the steppe. Manchu and Banner Mongols generally had, a approximate status level. They were seen as the core conquest groups.
But the formation of the Han banners suggests a purely pragmatic need.
Very much so. The Han Chinese component started around 1633, primarily because the Manchus desperately needed Chinese expertise in firearms.
Fans.
Particularly cannons, yes, which were critical for siege warfare and something the Manchu forces critically lacked. These units were expanded rapidly, paralleling the Manchu and Mongol banners, and you get 8 Han banners by 1642. It was a militaristic genesis, valuing their technical specialization.
So if the Han bannermen were that vital for technical military success, did that give them any status leverage?
It gave them privilege over the civilian population, but not status equality within the conquering elite. The Banner Han occupied a distinctly lower rung within the banners than their Manchu and Mongol counterparts.
Still higher than a non-banner Han civilian, though.
Oh, far higher. They were still considered part of the privileged conquering class. But their lower status served to reinforce the ethnic basis of Qing rule, making sure the Manchu clan always retain ultimate political and military authority.
That sets up the post-conquest reality in 1644 perfectly. Once they controlled Beijing, how did the banners become economically bound to the emperor?
This is the critical final mechanism of control. The bulk of the banners were moved into segregated urban garrisons all across China proper. Yes, and internally diversified. They would contain equal numbers of companies from each banner and ethnic tier. They were essentially isolated military communities. And having largely sold off their original land grants, they came to rely almost entirely on government stipends, supplied in silver and grain.
So their entire life, every aspect of it, was overseen by the state.
Their reliance on the emperor became total and absolute. Pamela Crossley describes this relationship as an unfree political and economic state.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning their social superior, the emperor, had a complete and legal veto over their individual autonomy, their movement, their finances. They were required to practice Manchu customs, live in these segregated insular communities, and maintain their status. This system guaranteed that the entire elite, the only people allowed to serve in high office, were fundamentally dependent on the dynastic center.
So the banners were the master tool of institutional control, using segregation and economic dependency to transform a conquering military force into a loyal, predictable bureaucratic class.
That's a powerful lesson in systemic political survival. The king achieved control through these massive, codified legal and social structures. The banners, the title rules.
And it's fascinating.
It is. Now let's pivot. Let's shift centuries back to the Northern Song Dynasty and examine a single piece of art. Because what's fascinating is seeing how power and social status manifested then, not in massive written institutional rules, but in subtle details encoded within a meticulously documented painting.
We're moving from the ironclad legalism of the king to the sophisticated, often veiled administrative life of the Song. We're doing a deep dive into a hand scroll called the Watermill, I understand the hand scroll format itself is crucial for understanding its historical significance.
It is. Hand scroll is a unique format. It's like a moving picture that you view from right to left. But what makes it a crucial historical document is that its design allows for accretions.
What are accretions?
Seals, inscriptions, and colophons added over centuries by owners, critics, emperors. These additions form the object's cultural biography, which is a direct reflection of political status and wealth across time.
And this biography starts with a mystery. The painting was misattributed for centuries.
It was. For a long time, it was attributed to Wei Xian, an artist from the Five Dynasties period. There's a half signature on the scroll claiming this, but scholars have proven that signature is a later forgery.
That's critical. It means we can't rely on the subjective judgment of connoisseurship.
Right. The traditional aesthetic value, that feeling or commune, the spirit resonance, heavily influenced by Neo-Taoism. You can't use that here.
So if we can't trust the signature, we have to become forensic historians and rely on objective facts within the image itself. What does modern scholarship now conclude?
The consensus, relying on those objective facts, material culture, architecture, technology, places its creation firmly in the Northern Song dynasty, probably between 1068 and 1100.
And is there a suspected artist?
The strong theory suggests the artist was Zhang Dimli, who was an official and the son-in-law of Emperor Yungzong. The level of detail suggests an artist with real insider knowledge of official operations.
Let's follow the power trail now, tracking its provenance through the seals. How did the painting's ownership history confirm its high status?
Well, the Trail of Seals confirms its consistent presence in the highest echelons of Chinese society. During the Northern Song, it immediately entered the imperial collection of the Huzong Emperor.
A notorious art collector.
Exactly. The scroll retains the full Xuanhe mounting style and 6 of the 7 original Xuanhe imperial seals. That immediately established it as a piece of extraordinary imperial value. It was a benchmark for quality.
And even after the song fell, it retained its value as a symbol of legitimate high culture.
It did. Even under Mongol rule, it was held in the imperial collection of the Yuan dynasty. It has the Tianli Shibao seal from the Wenzong emperor. The Mongol conquerors knew the value of possessing and validating Song imperial art as a marker of their own legitimacy.
Skipping forward, we see it circulating among the princely houses, which ties back directly to our opening discussion of the Qing hierarchy.
Precisely. During the Ming Dynasty, it was owned by 2 powerful, high-ranking members of the royal clan outside the direct line of succession, Zhu Gang, the Prince of Jin, and Zhu Yin, the Prince of Yu.
So these princes were using art to accumulate status.
Yes, a crucial, non-political method of accumulating prestige. The painting became a physical, tangible record of their own high status.
And its documented life ends circulating within the Qing aristocracy.
That's right. It was owned by the house of Prince Zheng, Jihana, and Olgunga before it left imperial circles and was sold through Beijing's famous Curio Street, Lulacheng, as the dynasty declined.
So the consistent chain of ownership, from Song Emperor through Ming and Qing princes, shows this was far more than just a pretty picture.
It was an object that codified and reflected the political status of its owner.
Okay, so we have a meticulously detailed, historically valuable painting, but we can't trust the signature.
Yeah.
We have to rely on what it depicts. We have to treat the Watermill as a historical blueprint, an objective record of the Northern Song administration.
And that's the intellectual shift the Song dynasty championed. We're moving from the subjective concept of Qing spirit resonance to the objective facts of material culture, which aligns perfectly with the rising Neo-Confucian emphasis on lie or principle and rationalism during that era.
So the emphasis shifts from the emotional quality of the artwork to its accurate representation of the world.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with setting the scene in the painting. We can pin down the exact time of year based on a banner advertising alcohol. That seems like an almost impossible level of precision.
It's astounding. The tavern prominently features a flag advertising Xinju.
Which means new alcohol or clear alcohol.
Right. And this single phrase is a powerful piece of historical dating evidence. Records from the period, especially the Dongjing Minghualu and Minglinglu, these detailed records of life in the Song capitals, they confirm that Xinju was one of 2 primary types of alcohol sold by the government.
And why was the government selling it? Was it a monopoly?
Absolutely. The alcohol business was a massive source of state tax revenue managed by the government's Dianjiansu department. And the sale of Xinju was strictly seasonal.
How seasonal?
It was sold exclusively around the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is usually between mid-September and early October. The other main type, zuji, or cooked alcohol, was sold only around the Qingming Festival in the spring. So the appearance of that Shinji banner pins the scene to a very specific 2 to 3 week window in early autumn.
That's a great example of how a tiny detail about material culture becomes a definitive historical marker. Do the botanical details in the painting corroborate that autumn timing?
They do, rigorously. The landscape shows weeping willow leaves that are turning yellow, which strongly suggests the early onset of autumn.
A detail the artist clearly paid attention to.
Yes. It contrasts sharply with other famous scrolls from the era, which show the green, burgeoning willows of spring.
And the other trees tell us something about the location and administration, not just the season.
Exactly. The elms and pagoda trees. The elm tree in particular is highly significant. The Song government, realizing the importance of river infrastructure, specifically planted elms and willows along the major riverbanks. The yellow, the Bian, the Qing, to consolidate dams and prevent floods.
And stealing these official trees was a serious offense.
A very serious offense. They were viewed as critical state infrastructure, regulated and guarded.
So the painting isn't just near a river. The plants themselves confirm it is situated near an official regulated waterway, implying state oversight of the entire operation.
It solidifies the idea that this is a government worksite. Now let's look at the people. The status hierarchy, as encoded in their costume. What was the visual differentiator between a senior official and a common person?
I remember you mentioning the anti-gossip hat.
The most immediate sign of high status in the Northern Song was the headwear of the senior officials. The iconic black, hard-framed straight-tails futu. The straight, rigid flaps sticking out horizontally were supposedly designed to prevent officials from chatting or leaning toward one another during court meetings.
That is brilliant. A fashion statement that doubles as a bureaucratic discipline tool.
Indeed. And their robes were the round-neck, wide-sleeved robes typical of the Song official class. Rank was primarily indicated by color red and purple for the highest grades, which tells you the officials in the tavern scene are high-ranking.
And the laborers, the millers, carters, and boatmen, what did their clothes tell us?
They wore functional garments. The black kerchief head wrapping, the konshu or blackhead, a term for commoners since the Qing dynasty, and functional clothes like the kikushan, a split jacket, and the dubikun calf-nose briefs.
The unglamorous, practical clothes of the working class.
Right. But there is one piece of clothing that acts as a precise historical marker.
Which?
The front-opening rectangle-shaped waistcoat worn by the common people. Scholars who study Song material culture, like Zhu Xi, confirm this specific style was characteristic exclusively of the Song dynasty. The artist's attention to this seemingly minor detail just reinforces the dating and the overall commitment to documentary accuracy.
Now for the most surprising social detail. The aha moment that unlocks the status of the workers themselves. The tattoos.
Yes, this is the definitive confirmation that this is a military operation. Several laborers are shown with extensive tattoos, or diminishing. In the Song dynasty, large, extensive tattoos were not typical of common civilian laborers or farmers.
So who had them?
They were characteristic almost exclusively of soldiers or rascals.
And since these men are working under the close supervision of formally dressed government officials in an officially regulated environment, they must be soldiers. But why were Sungers doing industrial milling?
This is critical to understanding Song administration. It confirms the Watermill is an official workshop, a shumawu, and the laborers are actually soldiers from the prefectural army, the Xiangjun.
So the government was using its army as a labor force.
Routinely. The Song government utilized the Xiangjun as military craftsmen and governmental laborers for essential state-run industries, everything from weapon manufacturing and brewing to, as we see here, grain delivery and milling.
So the state solved its labor shortage by forcing its military ranks into essential industrial service. And the tattoos were part of that administrative control.
Precisely. The tattoos were a state instrument for record-keeping. They marked their area of command and they prevented desertion and pay fraud. Historical documents confirm the state would tattoo the arms of soldiers with their unit and location so they could not escape.
It was an official, indelible dog tag.
Physically marking the state's tight control over its specialized manpower. The state was using its standing army as a controlled, state-owned industrial workforce. This level of codification is a parallel, albeit an artistic one, to the Qing's legal mechanisms of control.
That connection is powerful. In the Qing, control was encoded in your title and stipend. In the Song, control was encoded in the tattoo on your arm and the specific rules of the building you worked in. Let's move to the architecture, because the painting's technical rigor is astonishing.
It's truly a masterclass. The construction of the Watermill Hall itself provides undeniable proof of its official status. It features a crossed hip and gable roof, which is a high architectural grade.
A grade forbidden for commoners, I assume.
Explicitly forbidden, according to Song building regulations. Only high-status, official, or religious buildings were permitted such a roofline.
So the architecture itself is shouting, this is government property.
It is. Furthermore, the structural units, the dugong or bracket sets, these complex interlocking wooden components under the eaves, are meticulously detailed. To understand how precise this is, you have to know about the Yingzhou fasci.
Let's define that for the listener. What was the Yingzhou fasci?
The Yingzhou fasci, compiled around 1103, was the Song Dynasty's official state-mandated architectural treatise. It was essentially their massive standardized building code.
And it dictated every single dimension, proportion, and technique.
Everything permissible for state construction projects, including the specific bracket sets that denoted rank.
So the artist was painting directly from the architectural textbook of the time.
He was. The specific style of dugong depicted here, it's called Yitiao Sipuzo Dangxiang. It aligns perfectly with the standards laid out in the Yingzhou fasci.
And we know this style was used at the time.
We do. This specific structure is also found in surviving dated buildings, like the Chuzuan of the Shaolin Temple, which confirms this construction style was contemporaneous with the treatise and the dating of the painting. The geometry, the engineering, the ratio of components, it's all government mandated.
That's incredible. Even the minor details of the entrance steps are documented.
Indeed. The steps leading to the platforms feature the Tadao Xiangyan, which translates to elephant eyes of steps. This is a cupped triangular side framing style.
And the Yingzhou fascia dictated the layering of this framing.
Based on the height of the steps, yes. The ramp stair of the main hall is shown with 3 layers, which corresponds precisely with the regulations for stairs of that specific height. This level of rigorous documentation is overwhelming evidence of an official project painted by someone intimately familiar with state construction standards.
So we have state-mandated architecture for state-controlled labor, all applied to state-of-the-art technology. How advanced was this specific watermill?
It was revolutionary for its time. The mill utilizes the horizontal water wheel structure, which was the most common and simpler form in China. It didn't require complex gearing or extremely fast water flow.
Making it practical for a wide range of official waterways.
Exactly. And historical records indicate that this hydraulic grinding method was substantially more effective than traditional methods, roughly 3 times more effective than using cattle-powered mills. This reliance on hydraulic power was a major engine of the Northern Song's technological and economic boom.
And the painting captures the entire orderly industrial workflow, not just the finished machine.
It illustrates a highly rationalized, standardized process flow, exactly what you would expect from a state-run enterprise obsessed with efficiency. On the left terrace, you see the raw grain being unloaded and measured.
And washed.
Yes, there are water vats confirming the washing and drying process. This washing was critical, according to a later encyclopedia, the Tiangong Kaiwu. Grain had to be washed to remove dust and dirt before milling to ensure quality flour.
And the quality control continues right up until bagging.
It does. On the right terrace, the grain is milled and then meticulously sifted using 2 visible sieves of different densities. An upper sieve for rough sifting and a lower one for germ sifting. This ensures a final, high-quality processed product before the flour is bagged and loaded onto the waiting carts.
The whole scene is a perfect example of Northern Song industrial engineering. Let's talk about those carts because they also imply a massive logistical chain.
The carts confirm long-distance, large-scale transport. We see the large taping carts, which were these big freight carts with wooden railings and specific slanting wooden support legs at the back.
For parking or braking on steep ground.
Exactly. We also see the smaller Pingtu carts, which records indicate were often used by taverns to carry alcohol barrels, tying back to the Shunju clue.
And the hay rolls on the back of the carts.
The fact that the large taping carts have hay rolls hung on the back suggests they are provisioned for long journeys, either as fodder for the oxen or straw for the tattooed soldiers and laborers to sleep on. This entire visual confirms a complete, state-controlled logistical chain.
Transporting grain products from a regulated mill likely to the capital or another major population center.
That's the picture it paints.
We have established that the Watermill is a document of astonishing precision, detailing state architecture, mandated labor, and advanced technology in the Northern Song Dynasty. This raises the question, why would an official artist devote such painstaking detail, a form of painting called jiwa, to what is essentially a factory scene?
And that touches on the central philosophical tension of the song. During Emperor Huizong's reign, Jiwa, or ruled line architectural painting, was highly esteemed by the ruling class. Huizong, who appreciated technical perfection, ranked it third in the imperial catalog. He valued its accuracy and its, clear representational quality.
But the art establishment didn't necessarily agree with the emperor, did they?
Not at all. Traditional literati artists, who were deeply influenced by earlier Neo-Taoist aesthetics, often ranked Jiwa the lowest. They dismissed it as mechanical or craftsman-like.
Right.
They argued that because architecture was fixed and measurable, it lacked the core aesthetic value of spirit resonance, Qing, that subjective feeling of life and movement.
So the court's preference for this hyperrealistic style was actually part of a larger ideological shift.
Absolutely. It was a direct consequence of the rise of Neo-Confucianism, which emphasized lie principle and rationalism. This philosophy championed empirical study and understanding the fixed rational laws that govern nature and society. The precision and documentary accuracy of Jiwa aligned perfectly with this new rationalist ideal.
So it elevated its status within the imperial court as a form of art that dealt with principle.
Right.
So if the artist Zhang Dunli was painting this for the emperor or the court, was he just showing off state efficiency, or was there a hidden message in all that precision?
The existence of veiled commentary is highly plausible. Zhang Dunli held the stated artistic philosophy that drawing was a form of art that could reflect good and stop bad, advising people. This opens the door to what we can call the satire hypothesis.
The precision and detail act as camouflage for a potential critique.
Potentially, yes.
What visual element suggests a political critique?
The human element. The painting features 7 senior officials and 4 junior officials overseeing only 35 laborers who are actively milling the grain.
Okay, so a ratio of officials to actual working laborers of nearly 1 to 3.
Exactly. And that disproportion immediately suggests bureaucratic redundancy, which was a recognized and highly criticized political problem during the Northern Song, particularly under the dominant New Party reforms.
That's a subtle but damning visual indictment. The artist is using objective realism to highlight subjective inefficiency.
And he emphasizes this critique through spatial contrast. Notice the working officials, the ones directly supervising the grain and the delivery. They're placed in a simple, modest, thatched pavilion, very appropriate for a government worksite.
But the other officials?
By contrast, the redundant officials, who appear to be engaged in leisure, are placed in the gorgeous, decorated tavern across the water.
A simple office versus an extravagant leisure setting. That contrast is a clear visual satire.
It potentially satirizes the redundant, perhaps hedonistic officials of the dominant political faction. They were enjoying the fruits of state prosperity without contributing substantive work, while the necessary labor was being performed by forced military conscripts.
And the meticulous detail of the architecture and the technology served to ground the scene in reality, making the critique of the unnecessary bureaucratic presence all the more pointed.
That's the theory.
Finally, what about those minor technical flaws that scholars have identified, like the structurally unsound wooden shelf at the tavern? Could they be intentional?
They certainly raise that question. The Jafaluzi, that decorative wooden shelf in front of the tavern, it's structurally top-heavy and implausibly balanced. There's also a clear perspective mistake on one of the flatbed carts.
Which seems odd, given the overall rigor and adherence to the Yingzhou fascist standards elsewhere.
Right, so these might not be simple errors. They could be intentional artistic subversions, small, deliberate flaws included to draw attention to the extravagance of the tavern scene or the shoddy results of bureaucratic excess. Or, they might simply indicate that the artist prioritized the overall message and composition over minute, absolute technical realism in every single detail, confirming that even in this hyper-rational era, the painter was ultimately an artist delivering a message. When we look across the centuries of Chinese power systems, from the diminishing inheritance and ironclad military loyalty of the Qing banners to the precise agricultural administration of the Northern Song dynasty, the complexity of state control is always encoded in the details. The true nature of power wasn't just in grand, sweeping decrees or bloodlines. It was enforced and reflected in the precise number of layers on a structural beam, the density of a grain sieve, the width of a hat designed to prevent chatting, or the specific tattoo marking a soldier's origins. The Qing system used ironclad legal and social structures to enforce unwavering loyalty through codified status and economic dependency. But the Northern Song system, which prized rationalism and precision in art, allowed for political control and dissent to be so subtle that a court painter had to rely on the perfectly executed details of architecture, costume, and even botany to hide a scathing critique of bureaucratic excess within what outwardly appeared to be nothing more than a technical, factual documentation of an official Watermill workshop. Both systems, centuries apart, demonstrate that control is achieved not through massive pronouncements, but through obsessive, meticulous codification of the rules governing every facet of existence.